Chapter 17. Kathy, your turn.
Then they traveled from Amphipolis and Apollonia and came to Thessalonica, where there was a Jewish synagogue. As usual, Paul went to them and on 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and showing that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead, and saying, "This is the Messiah, Jesus, whom I am proclaiming to you." Then some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, including a great number of God-fearing Greeks, as well as a number of leading women. But the Jews became jealous, and when they had brought together some scoundrels from the marketplace and formed a mob, they set the city in an uproar. Attacking Jason's house, they searched for them to bring them out to the public assembly. When they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city officials, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here too, and Jason has received them as guests. They are all acting contrary to Caesar's decrees, saying that there is another king, Jesus." The Jews stirred up the crowd, and the city officials who heard these things. So taking a security bond from Jason and the others, they released them.
Okay, now, Thessalonica is an interesting city. I didn't know a whole lot about it. Probably because the Thessalonians books have never been my favorite. You know, I kind of like John and some of Paul's, but Thessalonians really wasn't a favorite of mine. The first Thessalonians was Paul's first letter that he ever wrote. But the city of Thessalonica was a unique city. It was kind of a hub for the Roman community. And they were kind of given free rein. They were allowed to mint their own money. They were allowed to mint money for the Roman Empire. And when they minted their money, guess whose picture they put on it? Caesar. They didn't want to do anything that would upset Caesar because they didn't want to lose this special privilege that they had as a Greek city that was favored by Rome. So when it says they are defying Caesar's decrees, saying that there's another king, one called Jesus. Where else did we hear that? When Jesus was before Pilate. Mm-hmm. The Jews were saying,
He's the king.
He's calling himself the king.
That's what it says over his cross. Jesus Christ, King of the Jews.
But Jesus never said that.
No.
He said, those are your words. In fact, when Pilate put those words on the cross, some of the other Jews said, take that down. He said, I wrote what I wrote.
So you say, isn't that what he said?
Yes.
Jesus said, so you say.
Yeah. Jesus never, in his whole ministry, claimed to be a new king. He did claim to bring a new message, a new piece of salvation. And so, as Paul has gone out on these missions, Paul was careful not to say Jesus is the new king. So what we have here is these people going over saying, he says that there's another king, one called Jesus. Well, that certainly would upset Rome. And the Thessalonians did not want to lose that favored status. You know, they had a great amount of power because their relationship that they had previously.
You mean they minted their own money for their own city?
Yes.
Wow, you couldn't take it out anywhere else and go shopping, could you?
Not really.
But that was common back in that era.
Was it?
Rome would allow some cities who had special favors to mint their own.
What's the difference, I wonder?
Well, they didn't have, if they needed more money, like our Congress today, they
They
printed
don't
more.
travel much back then.
Now, from where Paul was to Thessalonica, yes? Oh, I'm
Well,
sorry.
When you're printing more money like that, they call that debasement, because the value drops, because
That's
there's
right.
more money out there, and it's not as valuable.
That's right.
So they weren't coining. Or if it was, it wasn't silver or gold.
It was like a wooden nickel.
Like our nickels.
A wooden nickel.
Probably brass, I suppose.
I got one of those, a wooden nickel something.
I must have missed it somewhere, but when does Jason come about? All of a sudden, there's Jason. Is he anywhere else in the Bible, or just this few
No,
verses?
it
No.
just crops up here,
He just,
Okay.
out of the blue.
he's housing,
Yeah.
Paul and Silas.
He has a bed and breakfast.
Yeah. Yeah, an Airbnb. And,
First one.
but Thessalonica was about a 100-mile journey for Paul to get there, to that city. Now, it talks in here about, the people who were against Paul said that they were jealous, and they rounded up some bad characters from the marketplace, formed a mob. The Greek word used there can be translated as an agricultural part-time worker. This happens even today. Now, not in Hutch, but if you go to Wichita and go up into the Hispanic area in northwest Wichita, you can hire day workers. And so, this is the same thing that happened. These guys went out and they hired these day workers, and
To riot.
yeah, they got paid to protest.
We don't do
Again,
that, we don't do that anymore.
yeah, I say, not unlike what happens today when people start having these demonstrations, they hire people to come in and take part in them. And the amazing thing is, I've seen some of those people interviewed and asked by an interviewer, "What are you protesting?" They say, "I don't know." Yeah. Chuck?
This opens up, this idea of coinage, making your own, that opens up a whole new can. Because when somebody comes into your city, do they go to the temple and exchange their money because they're in that city?
No, they would still honor Roman coinage. So they would have Roman coinage as well as their own local.
Okay.
But having their local coinage, what that really implies is they were special.
They were favored.
Yeah, they were a favored city. And they were also on the main road through Macedonia. Today, Thessalonica is in the upper part of Greece on the east side. Yeah, the east side. And it was a major trading area. So they were able to evoke some power. And
It was a seaport?
no, but it was on a major thoroughfare that went across
Okay.
Macedonia. And
It was just
let's see,
an inlet.
I always thought it was Thessalonia
So it was close.
rather than Thessalonica.
Thessalonica
Thessalonica.
is the name of the
I'm gonna have to
town.
wash that other way out of my.
I don't
Yeah.
find that on my map.
Well, I
I
think
got
the
a-
name of the chapter, I mean, the book is.
There's two of them, First and Second Thessalonians.
Teachers
Yeah,
knew
the
everything.
Thessalonians live in Thessalonica.
Uh-huh.
That's what I thought.
Spoiling for a fight.
Now, when Paul gets there, he follows his usual pattern. He goes to a synagogue.
Trying to find it, where is it?
And you see it there?
But I'm not a very good mapper. You should have seen me in the army. We ended up in places I shouldn't have been. There,
That
okay.
clinger.
There, we found it.
I found
Okay.
it. It's right next door to Pella,
Yeah.
where they make the windows.
Yeah. Now, when Paul and Silas got to Thessalonica, one of the first things they needed they would go to the temple. We don't know for sure how long he was there, but he said he preached in the temple 3 times, so we could assume maybe 3 Sabbaths. So he had to make a living. And
Mine
guess,
says 3 Sabbaths.
yeah,
That's what this
So,
version does too.
yeah, he was there 3 weeks,
Sabbaths.
Don't give me much
See,
framework.
as usual, Paul.
and
Make some tents.
so what did he do? He made tents. He worked as a tent maker and leatherman.
Repair work.
So,
My map doesn't. pick
and
up this. Yeah, well, that's just kind of too small.
Luke,
This is all.
it says here in the commentary,
Oh, it should be, yeah.
Luke presented some of the arguments that Paul would have presented. 1, the Messiah must suffer and rise again.
That's when I get home.
2, Jesus died on the cross and rose again. And 3, therefore, this Jesus Paul is proclaiming must be the Messiah. So he's setting up a logical conclusion. If, then, therefore.
This is it.
So he, Paul is trying to present a
Hard to tell.
good case.
The rest of it, yeah.
Now, let's move on with chapter 10, or verse 10.
Thank you.
As soon as it was night, the brothers sent Paul and Silas off to Beroea. On arrival, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. The people here were more open-minded than those in Thessalonica, since they welcomed the message with eagerness and examined the scriptures daily to see if the things were so. Consequently, many of them believed, including a number of prominent Greek women, as well as men. But when the Jews from Thessalonica found out that God's message had been proclaimed by Paul in Beroea, they came there too, agitating and disturbing the crowds. Then the brothers immediately sent Paul away to go to sea, but Silas and Timothy stayed on there. Those who escorted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving instructions from Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was troubled within him when he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with those who worshiped God, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Then also some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers argued with him. Some said, "What is this pseudo-intellectual trying to say?" Others replied, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign deities," because he was telling them the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. They took him and brought him to the Areopagus and said, "May we learn about this new teaching you are speaking of? For what you say sounds strange to us, and we want to know what these ideas mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners residing there spent time on nothing else but telling or hearing something new. Then Paul stood in the middle of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see that you are extremely religious in every respect. For as I was passing through and observing the object of your worship, I even found an altar on which was inscribed, 'To an unknown God.' Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. The God who made..."
Let's pause for just a minute, because I want to talk a little about Athens. As Kathy was reading, he said that Athens was a God-fearing place, and it was a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate him. What do we think of when we think of Athens today?
Greek gods.
Well, Greek
The
gods,
ruins.
the ruins,
Olympics,
Olympics.
And they went to war with Sparta.
They went to war with Sparta,
Many gods.
and the Spartans won.
many gods.
Socrates.
Socrates.
Oh.
Not many of you majored in philosophy in college, I take it. I did.
We learned it, we had it in high school, if you
This is
believe that.
unusual, because what with this idle babblers that.
It says that, Kathy, you,
Didn't
well,
soak in very well.
Athens was, had a lot of educated, it was very educated.
It was an intellectual center,
Like Boulder, Colorado.
or what the people in Lawrence think of
Yeah,
themselves.
right.
Now, careful, careful.
They,
He's right. Oh, I got a story. Gideon, I'm handing out Bibles. We just go say, would you like a New Testament on campus at KU? The worst chewing I ever got in my life was from a professor. You thought I was a Mooney or something. And people, 1 out of 5 people would receive a Bible at KU.
You mean just walking the street handing it
Yeah,
out?
would you care to have a copy of the New Testament? That was about our sales pitch, you know,
Yeah.
would you like a free
Like
copy?
the Gideons.
We did the same thing at K-State. 2 out of 3 received their Bible. God, country, the land, you know.
Hey.
At KU, they gave out free sample packs of cigarettes.
Well, I never took that into account, I guess.
You
but,
gotta know your people.
Yes.
but Athens, you know, when you looked at Athens, it was a cultural center. It was sort of the home of philosophy. Socrates, Plato, and, you know, that whole pantheon of, you know, these were deep thinkers. So when Paul gets there, their approach is not, let's drive them out of town. Their approach is, well, let's talk about this. Maybe there's something that you can teach us. And so you've got these Stoic philosophers began to debate him. And some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked, he seemed to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So then they take him to the Areopagus.
Areopagus.
There is what she said. That's where they said, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. They didn't say, let's round him and his buddies up and drive him out of town. They said, come down to the university.
Their ears were tickling.
Yeah, come down here and explain it to us so, you know, we can all better understand, which is really, you know, says a lot for Athens, where other people just tossed him out. Athenians said, hey, maybe this is like calculus and we ought to learn it.
Maybe they weren't afraid of Caesar.
They may not have been as afraid of Caesar, but they valued learning above all else.
No cancel culture there.
No. And so, in effect, they said to Paul, come on down, let's have a Bible study. So he's now going to explain to them, and this, one of my favorite passages from the Bible is how shrewd Paul is when he gets to Athens.
Yeah.
Paul never called anybody dumb or stupid or unlearned. He is a wonderful communicator, and I think that may be why Jesus picked him to strike blind on the road to Damascus, because he was the worst against these young Christians, but boy, he hung right in there.
He was the only one during this time, Paul. He didn't have another disciple with him, right?
He had Silas and Barnabas, but they said that, or Silas and Timothy, but they stayed back in
Yeah.
Beroea.
But he went on by himself.
He went on by himself.
And the guy that went with him to Beroea was sent back to tell Timothy and Silas to come and join him.
So, Kathy, let's continue on.
I'm going to go back to 22 where we start with the whole his
Okay.
speech. Then Paul stood in the middle of the Areopagus and said, men of Athens, I see that you are extremely religious in every respect. For as I was passing it through and observing the objects of your worship, I even found an altar on which was inscribed, "To an unknown God." Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he is Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in shrines made by hands. Neither is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives everyone life and breath and all things. From one man he has made every nation of men to live all over the earth, and has determined their appointed times and the boundaries of where they live, so that they might seek God, and perhaps they might reach out and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and exist, as even some of your own prophets have said, for we are also his offspring. Being God's offspring, then, we shouldn't think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, an image fashioned by human art and imagination. Therefore, having overlooked the times of ignorance, God now commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has set a day on which he is going to judge the world in righteousness by the man he has appointed. He has provided proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some began to ridicule him, but others said, "We will hear you about this again." So Paul went out from their presence. Now, however, some men joined him and believed, among them whom were Dionysius the Areopagite, a woman named Damaris, and others with him.
So he preached a decent sermon, and some people believed.
Was this
Some
Demarius,
people want
was she
to
a
do
woman
more.
who worked in purple?
No,
No, she was not.
no.
Some people wanted to hear more.
Yes,
Now, Saul was a Roman citizen, and then he became Paul. So Paul was bilingual, because in Rome you have to be able to speak Latin, I think that was the required language, and then he was speaking Greek in Athens.
I would assume that he knew Latin, but he's in a Greek territory. Macedonia is a Greek territory.
Yeah.
So I would imagine most of the people there spoke Greek. And, the philosophers were not speaking Roman because they're Greek.
Yeah.
But I tell you, how shrewd was that? You've got all these shrines for other gods, but you got one to the unknown God, and I'm going to tell you who that is. And he doesn't need a statue, an idol, because you can't see him. You can only see his handwork. I'll tell you, if more of our missionaries would take that approach than trying to manipulate people into the form of
Yeah.
religion rather than the substance
Build a
of religion.
relationship. of
Yes.
some kind.
Because, if he'd have gone in and said, tear those damn temples down, it would have done two things. One, traveling to Greece and Rome would not be nearly as interesting because there wouldn't be any of those temples.
I would like to know the thought process behind, they were nice enough to say, okay, we may not know it all. We're going to give this a department, the
Yeah.
unknown God. I mean, that was probably a God thing right there.
Yeah. And, when you look at how he was treated by some of the Jews, Thessalonica, and some of the other cities where he was run out of town, these people are open-minded. The Athenians were. And when Paul is speaking, the arguments that he is building are logical arguments. And remember who this was written to, Theophilus, who was probably Greek, and who was probably an intellectual, and probably wealthy. Because you don't write, if Paul were coming around, he wouldn't be writing, if Luke was around, he wouldn't be writing a book for us. He'd want somebody who was really smart.
With every word, he was leveling, with every word, he was leveling their temple.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
was leveling it all and said, here it
And
is.
he wasn't saying, take them down.
Yeah.
That's part of your history. Keep it. But remember, you've got the new, this temple is for the unknown God. And it's interesting because he says, you don't have to make sacrifices to this God. You don't have to pay money to this God. And what do they do what do the Jews do in the temple?
They pay the.
They
shekel-
paid a temple
half shekel
tax.
tax.
And they had sacrifices. So Paul is really breaking with his Jewish roots. He's saying, this God, you don't need to make sacrifices to it. You know, you
Were they
just-
sacrificing in Thessalonica?
probably in the temples they would make,
Buy your chicken.
I think Baal did.
yeah, I mean, Baal was a big god, and all the way back to the time of the 40-year march. Who was it that the woman that when she packed her luggage, she also packed the idol?
No, it was
Rachel.
Joseph.
Was that Rachel?
Rachel,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, I mean, she packed an idol.
Said Jacob.
The new God is,
Jacob or Joseph?
the new God's the real God, but this is a family heirloom. And I'm gonna pack it just in case we get 10 miles out of town and the weather looks bad, I got something to fall back on. So, here, Jewish history was promoting those idols, even though they knew that there was only one God.
But the commoners at the temples weren't the one, like some guy didn't have a little market stand with chickens to sell you. It was the temple people. The church was the temple was making money
Making
off
money, yeah.
selling you the chicken to take into.
Because you came from out of town, you
Right.
didn't come with a goat.
Right,
You had to buy a goat when you got there,
right.
and then use that goat for a sacrifice.
And
then
the
you had
temple.
to change your money into
That was-
temple money.
Into shekels,
Yeah,
because,
so that was a money-making project.
yes, and that's why Jesus was upset and turned the tables on the money changers. Because they were not being fair. They knew people had to do this, so they were ripping them off by doing it. But can you imagine how that temple would have to smell after a Passover with all the animals that were sacrificed?
Blood burning. Ugh.
Yeah.
Where at?
In
In
Jerusalem.
what temple?
Anywhere.
Is that what they used Gehenna for? Threw it on a fire out there that was always burning?
Well, they may take the carcasses out
Yeah.
there, but still there's gonna be,
Blood.
the smell, and, I mean, they can't come in and clean up. You got people lined up to make a sacrifice. It's like the book of Psalms. You would go to the temple to pray, and you would ask the priest, I don't know how to pray. I mean, I'm just a shepherd. And he'd say, what's your problem? And they'd say what it was, and he'd go, here's a good psalm. Go in and pray that psalm. That's 25 cents. That's how the psalms were used in the temple. So, they were depending upon the priest as the intermediary to their relationship with God. And, here, these people in Athens were open-minded. They were willing to cut loose and listen to other thinking.
I've never seen in any kind of a movie, about Jesus or the apostles, anything that shows the actual way the sacrifices were done, or who handed what to who, and what they do with that chicken later, like sell it or eat it or whatever.
Chick-fil-A.
Well, where did I read in the Bible just recently that there was a special way to do sacrifices, like the doves, they'd cut them in half, and one half went this way, one half went this way, and didn't they walk between them or something?
When they were making a
That was
covenant.
Abraham.
Abraham.
The covenant.
Oh,
But,
okay.
but anybody who made a
That was an
covenant, if two people were making a covenant,
Uh-huh.
they would cut what the sacrifice was in half.
Yeah.
And they would pass between it.
Yeah,
Wow.
and then they
But
laid
that
so
didn't go
that
in
if you
the temple.
put them together, they'd be back whole.
They didn't do that in the
I don't
temple,
think they
though.
put them back.
They didn't do it in the
But
temple.
see, in Jeremiah
That would be a
31,
messy place to
where
work.
God enters into a covenant with man, you know, God, the fire passes through the two halves of the animal.
Gooey.
So, but there was a very prescribed method for all
I
these
figured.
sacrifices. I mean,
Among other things, they had to do it in a way that was least painful to the animal.
yes,
Was that a real thing or was that a dream?
No, that was a real thing.
Abraham- Huh?
That was a
That
real
really
thing.
happened. The Abrahamic covenant was not at night.
the,
I wonder if they went across with bare feet or sandals on.
I don't know, but I know, I was watching something on television last night, and I wish I could remember what it was. There was a show I was watching, and this woman was explaining to somebody else. She said, my husband got fired from the slaughterhouse. She said, it was a kosher slaughterhouse. And when Jews, they have slaughterhouses where they prepare animals, the most important thing is to treat the animals humanely. And they fired her husband because he was going, you're gonna be a hamburger.
Oh my.
And I'm thinking to myself, I gotta remember that for Bible study. But, you know, there are humane ways, and we would like to think that all animals are killed in a humane way.
It doesn't really look that way, though. If you
No.
see a packing house or one of those.
Did they bleed them
slaughterhouse.
out? Is that what they did? They
Yeah,
bled them out?
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And they do that even today. The slaughterhouses, they've got a gun that drives
but
into
that doesn't
their,
make them bleed, but this would.
well
They-
then, once they're dead, they cut their
their
throat
throat.
and they have chains around their
Oh.
back legs that
Yeah,
just,
I remember that. That's a
But-
hard thing. I wouldn't want to be on the kill floor.
I couldn't work in the kill floor. I mean, I don't like to, you know, if I'm eating a good piece of meat, I just want to think.
Too much information.
Yeah. I just want to think Costco found this meat somewhere in it.
To me, that's like the Ten Commandments. They are the kill floor of Christianity. You can't keep them. Somebody's going to die today, and you're going to live for Christ. But that's always thought of that. I know they're holy and everything, but they're not keepable, and that's the first place we come
Yeah,
to die to ourselves.
yeah, I would have had a hard time living on a ranch.
Well, we
We
Yeah.
need to start watching these Alaska shows with the people up there living off the land and kill their moose, and
Yeah, we've seen.
then they carry 800 pounds of moose meat out on,
Yeah.
on their back to the.
Well, I'm just thinking about these young kids that raise a calf or
Oh,
a
yeah.
goat, and they take them to the fair and they win a prize,
Yeah.
and then they
Some company
sell
buys
them, and
their-
they know they're, you know, that sweet little thing that they nursed from a baby to a full-grown sheep.
Well, if you're in the agriculture
they're-
business, you know where your food comes from.
That's right.
You know what the.
Yeah,
what the stuff
and
is.
and that's why I
They're
was
not
glad
Yeah.
I didn't,
You wonder.
all the farming I did was with corn,
Well, there was a
tomatoes.
cute show yesterday on PBS where this doctor decided to study cows. And he worked with those cows till they were just like puppy dogs. They'd come up to him to be pet
Oh, yeah.
and everything. It was really neat.
You know, the animals,
Keep them going forward.
farmers, you build a relationship with the animals.
Well, that comes out in the story of Nathan and David, because Nathan wanted I think it was Nathan, wanted a lamb, and he didn't want to do his own lamb, so he went to get his neighbor's lamb, and this neighbor was poor. He only had this one lamb, and he had been hand feeding him and holding him and all this stuff. You know, it was like a family member to him. And Nathan took it and slaughtered
And
it,
that's Bathsheba.
because he didn't want to slaughter his own sheep.
You're right.
Well, was Isaac, the sacrifice, where God told Abraham to sacrifice his. And, you know, I can imagine walking up that hill and the little boy saying, "Where's the sacrifice?"
God will provide.
And then they find the lamb in the bush, and that was the sacrifice. But I don't,
Well, don't you, I just cannot make the connection between animal sacrifices and the whole thing about a person being sacrificed. I mean,
Paul said, I must die daily. Paul said, we gotta die to ourselves if we're gonna live for Christ.
you know,
And that's where it comes. It's not literal, but
well, what it is putting your own personal desires
aside for God.
aside for God.
Well, I see why Abraham thought,
You know, that's not one of my favorite passages in Scripture. But we do have to find, and that's what Lent is all about. You know, we're supposed to give something up, to die to ourselves, so we can live to Christ. But dying to ourselves, I don't think is giving up chocolate or Coke or whatever. It's like the thing I posted on Facebook, the quote from Erasmus. You know, we need to give something up, but God doesn't like losers.
Yeah.
You need to lose something, but God doesn't like losers.
one of our, well, the dean in Salina said, all this saving up candy people give you in a box until Lent's over, but you can have it, but not till after Lent. He says, no, don't bother to do that. We were kids. He says, instead of digging a hole, why don't you build something? You know, add something positive.
Do something.
That's what he wanted us to do.
I
It
kinda
can
like-
be very simple.
I kinda like the meme I saw a couple days ago about St. Valentine's. And here I was beaten and beheaded and blah, blah, and you celebrate it by passing around chocolates to your, to your family.
Yeah, St. Valentine did not live a happy demise. He was suffered and was put to death.
I didn't know he was the
I
same.
didn't either.
So did we finish
Oh, my
17?
We finished 17,
Yes, we did.
and we're going to move on from, now we're going to move from Athens
To
to
Corinth.
Corinth. And that'll be a good passage, a good section, because Corinth was a seaport city, and it was a wild town.
Seaport
So,
cities tend to
Look
be
at it
that way,
sometime.
don't they?
yes, yes. For some reason, when those sailors got to town,
Yeah. we
They
press
had
on
fun.
to the mark. Press.
all right, you all have a great week.